Welcome to the Alberta Construction Safety Association's info session on formal hazard assessment, inspections, and site-specific hazard assessment. In this video, we will talk about the components of a formal hazard assessment system, inspections both formal and informal, site-specific hazard identification, and the key differences between them. Let's start with the formal hazard assessment. In Section 2 of the ACSA's Health and Safety Standard Audit document, auditors are asked to score a company's hazard assessment system based on whether they have an inventory of jobs or positions, whether they have a task inventory, whether they have identified and assessed health and safety hazards on a pre-job or project startup or work type, and whether those hazards have been prioritized. Different companies may use a variety of terms to talk about the same thing. You need to understand the concept, not the terms, to accurately judge a company's hazard assessment systems. The very first audit question in Section 2 asks if formal hazard assessments have been completed for pre-job or project startup. Then it asks if you have completed an inventory of jobs, tasks, or positions. Here you could begin by looking at the company organizational chart. What work types or jobs or tasks are carried out by people in these positions? Keep in mind, it is not the position that creates possible health and safety hazards. It is the tasks that workers do in those positions that may generate hazards. So, you may need an inventory of all the possible tasks carried out in the company's operations. These are the jobs people in the company do, and typically the task can be broken down into a manageable number of steps. Now, this may seem obvious, but it needs to be documented. More than one position may perform the same or nearly identical task. For example, office workers in different departments may have different job titles, but they're likely all doing very similar tasks. And a person in one position might be doing multiple tasks in that position. Now comes hazard identification and risk measurement. Health and safety hazards must be identified for each task, job, or position. These hazards must then be individually assessed to determine the risk for each hazard. To determine risk, you need to look at a combination of factors like severity, frequency, or probability. A matrix is often a tool used to measure risk in a hazard. Once hazards are identified and the risk for each assessed, these health and safety hazards need to be prioritized. The higher the rank, the more attention needs to be paid to implementing and maintaining hazard controls for these hazards. Finally, for some companies to close the loop on this system, ensure there is a demonstrated and proven process for formal hazard assessment to be completed at the beginning of a project. If a specific project will introduce changes to your existing hazard assessment, you will need to document your reassessment process to ensure hazards remain controlled. Also, if new tasks are introduced or if new equipment is used, you need to ensure that the associated hazards are identified and their risks assessed. And was this documented in some way? So, that's formal hazard assessment. Remember, different terms might be used, but this is what you are looking for in a company's formal health and safety hazard assessment processes. Keep in mind that companies will use different processes to ensure that these hazard assessments have been completed. This is why we have broken Section 2 into separate parts, so that you can identify the different components being used. This formal system is distinct from two other items we will be reviewing: inspections and site-specific hazard identification. So what's the difference between inspections and hazard assessments? Inspections are not a hazard assessment, but they are an important part of a company's overall system of hazard assessment and control. Inspections provide a way for a company to check if its hazard assessment and hazard control measures are actually working. An inspection will involve being on the worksite and looking for compliance with the company's policies and ensuring controls are in place. It will observe actual worker behavior and may pick up on new or unanticipated hazards. So inspections are not hazard assessments, but if done right, they drive continuous improvement into the company's formal hazard assessment and control systems. Inspections come in both formal and informal varieties. Formal inspections are typically scheduled with written, itemized requirements and checklists. Informal inspections are regular and ongoing and may be included in job descriptions or built into tasks. So, we've looked at formal hazard assessments and inspections. What about site-specific hazard identification? While formal hazard assessment is focused on individuals and their specific tasks, site-specific hazard identification looks at specific operation or work environment to identify the hazards these will present. It may be carried out on the site itself, or in a pre-job meeting before going to the site, or a combination of both. The key is that it is carried out before the project or job begins, or when a change occurs. Typically, there are formalized processes or checklists associated with this type of hazard identification, and communication is a key component of this type of assessment. So you'll see terms like tailgate meeting or pre-job safety meeting associated with site-specific hazard identification systems. So looking at the big picture, formal hazard assessment systematically captures everything workers are doing and identifies, assesses, and prioritizes the hazards presented by their tasks. Inspections are interested in both workers and their work sites. Unlike hazard assessment and site-specific hazard identification, inspections usually take place with operations already underway. They provide feedback on whether the hazard identification, risk assessments, and controls are working and adequate. Site-specific hazard identification looks at the hazards presented by a particular operation or work site before the job starts or when things change. Hazard identification and assessments anticipate what an individual will do or how an operation will proceed, and controls are based on that. Inspections look at what individuals are doing and how operations are proceeding and enable adjustments on the fly and adjustments to the hazard assessments and controls. Remember, companies will create systems using their own terminology that makes sense for their operations. But it is important that you understand the concepts behind formal hazard assessments, inspections, and site-specific hazard identification. Understand the concept, and you'll be able to evaluate your company's hazard assessment systems quickly and accurately.